The battlefield stretched endlessly before him, a desolate expanse of charred earth and shattered starships. The air shimmered with the heat of plasma fire, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled his lungs. Captain Elias Thorne stood amidst the chaos, his armor scorched and dented, his body battered but unbroken. He had fought in countless wars, seen civilizations rise and fall, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The war between humanity and the Jalari had raged for decades, consuming planets and lives with equal ferocity. And now, as he stared at the towering figure of the alien queen descending from her golden flagship, he felt the weight of an impossible choice pressing down on him. Her name was Queen Silra, though most humans only knew her as the Radiant. She was a vision that defied description. Her skin shimmered like liquid opal, catching the light in ways that seemed almost magical. Her eyes glowed with an inner fire, twin suns that burned with wisdom and power. Her presence commanded awe, even from her enemies. But it wasn't just her beauty that captivated those who saw her. It was the aura of authority that surrounded her, an invisible force that made knees buckle and voices falter. Elias had heard stories about her, how she had united the fractured tribes of the Jalari under one banner, how she had turned their once nomadic fleets into a formidable empire. Some said she was ruthless, others claimed she was merciful, but all agreed on one thing: she was unstoppable. Today, however, she wasn't here to conquer. She had come to negotiate. The terms of the ceasefire were simple yet unthinkable. A human warrior would agree to marry her, a union meant to symbolize peace between their species. It was a desperate gambit, born out of years of bloodshed and futility. Neither side could afford to continue the war, not when entire worlds were being reduced to ash. Yet the idea of such a marriage was met with outrage among the human ranks. Many saw it as surrender, a betrayal of everything they had fought for. But Elias knew better. He had seen too many friends die, too many families torn apart by hatred and fear. If marrying the alien queen could end the war, then so be it. He stepped forward, his boots crunching against the debris-strewn ground. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum roll in his ears. Around him, his comrades watched in stunned silence, their faces masks of disbelief and anger. But Elias didn't care. This wasn't about pride or politics, it was about survival. As he approached the queen, he felt every eye on him, human and alien alike. The tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Queen Silra regarded him with those piercing eyes, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without warning, she extended a hand, her fingers long and delicate, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. Elias hesitated, his mind racing with doubts and fears. What if this was a trap? What if agreeing to this meant losing everything he held dear? But deep down, he knew there was no turning back. With a deep breath, he took her hand, feeling a strange warmth spread through his body, as though her touch carried some kind of energy he couldn't comprehend. "I accept," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of gasps, curses, and whispers. Some of his fellow soldiers looked at him with betrayal in their eyes, while others simply stared in shock. But Elias didn't flinch. He had made his decision, and now he would have to live with the consequences. As Queen Silra nodded, a sense of finality washed over him. The war might be ending, but his own battle was just beginning. Little did he know, this act of sacrifice would lead him down a path far more complicated and dangerous than he could ever imagine. The journey to the Jalari homeworld was unlike anything Elias had ever experienced. Their flagship, the Orion, was a marvel of alien engineering, its corridors lined with crystalline structures that pulsed softly with light. The air hummed with an energy that seemed alive, vibrating against his skin in a way that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. Every step he took brought new wonders, and new challenges. The Jalari crew moved around him with fluid grace, their movements precise and deliberate. They spoke in melodic tones, their language flowing like music, though translators embedded in his helmet allowed him to understand their words. Queen Silra walked beside him, her presence commanding yet oddly calming. She rarely spoke, choosing instead to observe him with those luminous eyes. Occasionally she would ask questions, about Earth, about humanity, about his life before the war. Her curiosity was genuine, and Elias found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected. He told her about growing up on a small colony planet, about joining the military to protect what little he had left after a raid destroyed his home. He spoke of the camaraderie among soldiers, the bonds forged in the fires of battle. And, tentatively, he shared his fears, not just for himself, but for the future of his people. In return, Silra offered glimpses into her own world. She spoke of the Jalari's nomadic past, of their struggle to find a place where they truly belonged. She described the rituals and traditions that bound her people together, the intricate dances and songs that celebrated their unity. Through her words, Elias began to see the Jalari not as monsters, but as beings driven by the same desires and fears as any human. Yet there was something else beneath her carefully chosen stories, a sadness that lingered in her eyes whenever she mentioned her role as queen. He wanted to ask her about it, but something held him back. Perhaps it was respect, or perhaps it was fear of overstepping boundaries he didn't fully understand. When they finally arrived at the Jalari homeworld, Elias was overwhelmed by its beauty. The planet, known as Velora, was a kaleidoscope of colors, its skies painted in hues of gold and violet. Towering spires of crystal rose from the ground, refracting sunlight into dazzling patterns. Rivers of liquid light snaked across the landscape, their surfaces shimmering like molten glass. It was a world of dreams, a place that seemed to exist outside the bounds of reality. And at its center stood the royal citadel, a structure so grand and intricate that it defied comprehension. Its walls were adorned with living vines that glowed faintly, their petals unfolding and closing in rhythmic harmony. Inside, the halls were filled with soft chimes and the scent of blooming flowers, creating an atmosphere of serenity that clashed sharply with the turmoil in Elias's mind. Preparations for the wedding ceremony were swift and meticulous. Servants dressed in flowing robes attended to every detail, ensuring that everything adhered to Jalari tradition. Elias was given garments woven from threads that sparkled like stardust, their fabric cool and smooth against his skin. He was instructed in the customs of the ceremony, taught the gestures and phrases that would seal the bond between him and the queen. Despite the care taken to make him feel welcome, Elias couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. No matter how much effort went into including him, he remained painfully aware of the gulf between his world and theirs. Silra, too, seemed burdened by the weight of expectation. Though she carried herself with regal poise, Elias noticed moments when her composure slipped, a flicker of hesitation in her gaze, a slight tremor in her voice. These fleeting glimpses of vulnerability only deepened his confusion. Was she truly committed to this alliance, or was she merely fulfilling a duty imposed upon her by circumstance? He wanted to believe in her sincerity, but doubt gnawed at the edges of his trust. On the eve of the ceremony, Silra summoned him to a private chamber within the citadel. The room was bathed in soft, golden light, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that depicted scenes of Jalari history. She stood by a window overlooking the city, her silhouette framed by the vibrant glow of the setting suns. When she turned to face him, her expression was solemn. "There is something you must know," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "This union is more than a symbol of peace. It is a test, for both our peoples. If we fail, the consequences will be dire." Elias frowned, his stomach tightening with unease. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if weighing her next words carefully. "There are factions among my people who oppose this alliance. They see it as weakness, a betrayal of our heritage. Should they gain power, they will stop at nothing to destroy what we have built. And your people?" She paused, her gaze searching his face. "They will not easily forgive you for this. You must tread carefully, Elias. Trust no one, not even me." Her warning sent a chill down his spine. Until now, he had believed this marriage to be a straightforward solution, a way to end the war and bring stability to both sides. But Silra's words revealed a darker truth. This was not the end of conflict, but the beginning of a new struggle, one that would demand sacrifices far greater than he had anticipated. As dawn broke over Velora, casting the citadel in radiant light, Elias stood at the threshold of a future he could scarcely comprehend. The ceremony loomed ahead, its significance heavy with promise and peril. For better or worse, his fate, and the fate of two species, was now irrevocably intertwined with the alien queen. The day of the ceremony arrived, cloaked in an atmosphere both surreal and suffocating. The great hall of the royal citadel was transformed into a spectacle of light and sound, every surface adorned with shimmering fabrics and cascading flora that pulsed with bioluminescent energy. Thousands of Velora gathered, their forms blending seamlessly with the ethereal surroundings, their eyes fixed intently on the central dais where Elias and Queen Silra stood. Human delegates, few in number and visibly uneasy, occupied a corner of the room, their expressions ranging from guarded neutrality to thinly veiled disdain. As the ritual commenced, the air grew thick with anticipation. Chanting voices filled the chamber, weaving together ancient melodies that resonated deep within Elias's chest. Each note carried layers of meaning, histories and prayers passed down through generations of Velora. The ceremony itself was a labyrinth of symbolic gestures and vows, each step meticulously choreographed to bind the two leaders, and by extension, their peoples, in a sacred pact. Elias followed the instructions given to him, his movements deliberate yet stiff, his mind struggling to reconcile the weight of the moment with the absurdity of his situation. He was a soldier, not a diplomat, and certainly not a king. Yet here he stood, pledging his loyalty to a queen whose very existence challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. Through it all, Silra remained poised, her presence both commanding and enigmatic. Her every motion exuded grace, her glowing eyes never straying from Elias's face. There were moments when their gazes locked, brief flashes of connection that hinted at something deeper, an understanding, perhaps, or a shared burden neither dared to voice aloud. When the final vow was spoken, sealing the union, the hall erupted in cheers and applause. The sound was deafening, a tidal wave of approval that threatened to drown Elias in its intensity. It struck him then, with startling clarity, that this was no mere performance. To the Velora, this marriage was real, binding in ways he had not fully grasped until now. But the celebration that followed only heightened his unease. Feasts were laid out on sprawling tables, laden with exotic delicacies that shimmered and shifted under the ambient light. Dancers moved in hypnotic patterns, their bodies illuminated by floating orbs of light that seemed to respond to their every step. Yet beneath the veneer of festivity, tensions simmered. Human delegates kept their distance, exchanging terse whispers and casting wary glances toward the newlyweds. Even among the Velora, cracks began to show. Some openly embraced the alliance, their enthusiasm bordering on reverence. Others, however, watched silently from the shadows, their expressions unreadable but their disapproval palpable. Elias found himself caught in a whirlwind of contradictions. On one hand, he was treated with a level of deference that bordered on worship. Servants bowed low as he passed, offering him drinks and delicacies with trembling hands. Nobles sought his attention, eager to curry favor with the human who now shared their queen's throne. On the other hand, he sensed the undercurrent of hostility, the subtle jabs and veiled insults aimed at undermining his legitimacy. One noblewoman, draped in robes that shimmered like liquid silver, approached him during the feast, her smile sweet but her words laced with venom. "You must be proud," she purred, her voice dripping with condescension, "to rise so far above your station. Tell me, does your kind even understand the gravity of what has transpired today?" Elias clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. "I understand enough," he replied evenly. "Enough to know that peace requires sacrifice, from all sides." Her laughter was sharp, cutting through the din of the celebration like a blade. "Sacrifice? How quaint. Let us hope your bravery does not falter when the true cost becomes clear." Before he could respond, she turned away, melting back into the crowd. The encounter left Elias shaken, a reminder of the precariousness of his position. He sought solace in Silra's presence, finding her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. Her shoulders were tense, her usual composure fractured by something he couldn't quite identify. "They don't trust me," he said quietly, joining her at the railing. "Do they?" Silra sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It is not just you they distrust. They question the wisdom of this alliance, the risks it poses to our sovereignty. Change is difficult, Elias. Especially for a people who have long valued tradition above all else." "And what of you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you trust me?" She turned to face him then, her glowing eyes searching his. For a moment, He thought she might evade the question, offer some diplomatic platitude to ease the tension between them. Instead, she reached out, her hand brushing his arm in a gesture that was startlingly intimate. "I want to," she admitted, her voice tinged with vulnerability. "But trust is earned, not given. We must navigate these waters together, Elias. And we must do so carefully." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with implication. As the night wore on, Elias found himself increasingly isolated, both physically and emotionally. The festivities continued around him, a blur of color and sound that felt distant, almost unreal. He wandered the halls of the citadel, seeking refuge from the scrutiny and judgment that followed him at every turn. In one quiet alcove, he stumbled upon a mural depicting the history of the Velora, a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies rendered in exquisite detail. Among the images, he noticed recurring motifs, symbols of unity, of sacrifice, of resilience. It struck him then that the Velora were not so different from humans after all. Both species had endured hardships, faced choices that tested their resolve. And now, bound together by this fragile alliance, they were being asked to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. Yet even as he tried to find comfort in this realization, doubt gnawed at him. Could he truly fulfill the role thrust upon him? Could he bridge the gap between two worlds that seemed determined to remain apart? The answers eluded him, slipping through his grasp like sand through an hourglass. All he knew for certain was that he could not turn back. Not now, not ever. The path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, but it was the only path available to him. And so, with a heavy heart and a resolve tempered by fear, Elias returned to the great hall, ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. Days blurred into weeks as Elias adjusted, or rather, struggled, to adapt to his new life within the royal citadel. The weight of his responsibilities pressed down on him like an invisible mantle, each passing moment reminding him of the irreversible nature of his decision. Mornings began with audiences, where Velora nobles and dignitaries sought his counsel on matters ranging from trade agreements to cultural exchanges. Though he was treated with outward respect, the undertones of skepticism were impossible to ignore. Some petitioners addressed him with exaggerated formality, their words dripping with irony. Others avoided eye contact altogether, their disdain thinly veiled behind polite smiles. Each interaction chipped away at his confidence, leaving him questioning whether he belonged in this alien court. Even more challenging were the ceremonial duties that accompanied his title. Rituals and festivals punctuated the calendar, each requiring his participation in elaborate displays of unity. During these events, Elias often found himself paraded before crowds of Velora citizens, their glowing eyes watching him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. He performed the required gestures and recited the prescribed phrases, but the disconnect between his actions and his emotions grew wider with each passing day. It was as though he were playing a role in a play he hadn't auditioned for, his lines rehearsed but never fully understood. Amidst these public obligations, Elias sought solace in the quieter corners of the citadel. The library, with its towering shelves of crystalline books, became a sanctuary where he could retreat from the relentless scrutiny. Here, he immersed himself in Velora history and philosophy, hoping to gain insight into the culture that now defined his existence. The texts revealed a civilization steeped in tradition, where honor and duty were paramount. Yet they also hinted at internal conflicts, factions vying for influence, ideologies clashing over the direction of their society. These discoveries added another layer of complexity to his already fraught position, reinforcing the fragility of the peace he had pledged to uphold. His relationship with Silra remained equally fraught. While they shared quarters and appeared together at official functions, their interactions were marked by a cautious distance. Conversations were polite but superficial, rarely venturing beyond topics of statecraft or protocol. Attempts to broach more personal subjects were met with evasive responses or abrupt changes in subject. Elias sensed that Silra harbored secrets, burdens she refused to share even with him. This reticence only deepened his sense of isolation, making him feel like an outsider in a marriage meant to symbolize unity. One evening, unable to bear the oppressive solitude any longer, Elias ventured onto the balcony overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, as always, the spires of Velora glimmering under the twin moon's light, rivers of liquid light winding through the landscape like veins of molten gold. Yet tonight, the beauty failed to soothe him. Instead, it magnified his feelings of alienation, highlighting the vast gulf between his world and this one. As he stood there, lost in thought, a soft voice interrupted his reverie. "You seem troubled." Turning, he saw Silra standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the interior lights. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes reflecting the shimmering cityscape behind him. "It's nothing," he replied automatically, though the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. She stepped closer, her movements graceful yet hesitant. "Elias, we cannot continue like this. If we are to succeed, if this union is to mean anything, we must find common ground. Trust begins with honesty." Her words struck a chord, resonating with the doubts and fears he had been suppressing. For a moment, he considered confiding in her, sharing the weight of his struggles and uncertainties. But the barriers between them, the mistrust, the cultural divide, felt insurmountable. Instead, he offered a vague response, deflecting the conversation back to safer territory. "You're right," he said, forcing a smile. "We'll figure it out. Together." Silra studied him for a long moment, her gaze piercing yet tinged with sadness. Finally, she nodded and stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the citadel. As the door closed behind her, Elias exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The encounter left him unsettled, a reminder of how far they still had to go. Despite the mounting challenges, Elias refused to give up. Beneath the strain and uncertainty, he clung to the belief that this alliance could work, that peace was worth the sacrifices demanded of him. Yet the road ahead remained shrouded in darkness, its twists and turns obscured by the fog of mistrust and fear. With each passing day, the stakes grew higher, the consequences of failure more dire. And though he couldn't foresee the trials awaiting him, one thing was certain: the path to reconciliation would demand more than he had ever imagined. The days that followed were a blur of tension and unease, as though the citadel itself had become a crucible testing the limits of Elias's resolve. He threw himself into his duties with renewed determination, hoping that sheer effort might bridge the gap between him and the Jalari. Yet no matter how many ceremonies he attended or negotiations he mediated, the chasm remained, a yawning void filled with unspoken grievances and lingering mistrust. One evening, as the twin moons bathed Velora in their silvery glow, Silra summoned him to a secluded chamber deep within the citadel. The room was unlike any other he had seen, its walls lined with translucent panels that pulsed faintly with shifting colors. In the center stood an intricate mechanism resembling a crystalline tree, its branches adorned with glowing orbs that seemed to hum with energy. Silra stood beside it, her expression unreadable but her posture tense. "This is the Nexus," she said without preamble, her voice low and measured. "It is the heart of our civilization, a repository of knowledge and power passed down through generations." Elias approached cautiously, his gaze drawn to the pulsating light emanating from the structure. "What does it do?" "It connects us, to each other, to our ancestors, to the essence of who we are." She paused, her luminous eyes locking onto his. "And now, it must connect you as well." Before he could respond, she extended her hand toward one of the glowing orbs. As her fingers brushed its surface, the entire chamber resonated with a deep, melodic hum. Images began to form in the air around them, scenes of Jalari history unfolding like living tapestries. Battles fought under alien skies, rituals conducted beneath starlit canopies, moments of triumph and tragedy rendered in vivid detail. Silra turned to face him, her expression grave. "To truly lead alongside me, you must understand us, not just our customs, but our soul. The Nexus will allow you to experience our collective memory, to see the world as we do." Elias hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. "Will it hurt?" She offered a faint smile, though it carried little reassurance. "Pain is subjective. But yes, it may challenge you in ways you cannot anticipate." He nodded, swallowing his apprehension. If this was what it took to earn the trust of her people, and perhaps even hers, then so be it. Stepping forward, he placed his hand on the orb beside hers. Instantly, a surge of energy coursed through him, flooding his senses with visions and emotions that defied comprehension. He saw the birth of stars, felt the pulse of creation reverberating through the cosmos. He witnessed the rise of the Jalari, their nomadic fleets traversing vast distances in search of a home. He experienced their struggles, the losses, the betrayals, the sacrifices that forged them into the beings they were today. And then came the war, not as he had known it, but from their perspective, a desperate fight for survival against a species they barely understood, whose actions seemed driven by fear rather than reason. When the connection broke, Elias staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The chamber spun around him, the images lingering in his mind like echoes of a dream. Silra steadied him with a firm grip, her touch grounding him amidst the chaos. What was that?" he managed to ask, his voice trembling. "That," she replied softly, "was truth. Our truth. Now you carry it within you, bound to us in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Her words hung heavy in the air, their implications sinking in slowly. This was no mere gesture of inclusion, it was a test, a trial meant to determine whether he was worthy of standing beside her. And though the experience had left him shaken, it also ignited something within him, a flicker of understanding, of empathy, that he hadn't felt before. In the weeks that followed, Elias found himself changed in subtle yet profound ways. The memories shared through the Nexus lingered at the edges of his consciousness, influencing his thoughts and decisions in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Conversations with Jalari nobles became less strained, their skepticism giving way to cautious curiosity. Even the most ardent opponents of the alliance began to soften, their resistance tempered by glimpses of sincerity in his interactions. Yet the transformation came at a cost. Sleep eluded him, his nights plagued by fragmented dreams that blurred the line between his own memories and those of the Jalari. He woke each morning feeling both exhilarated and exhausted, as though he were carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. The strain showed in his demeanor, his once steady confidence replaced by a quiet intensity that others struggled to decipher. Silra noticed the change, her sharp eyes missing nothing. One night, as they stood together on the balcony overlooking the city, she spoke without turning to face him. "You're different," she said simply. "The Nexus has marked you." "I didn't have a choice," he replied, his tone edged with frustration. "If I'm to lead alongside you, I need to understand your people. Isn't that what you wanted?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "But I underestimated the toll it would take. The Nexus is not meant for outsiders, it demands a price few are prepared to pay." Her admission stirred something within him, a mixture of anger and gratitude that he couldn't reconcile. "Why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret?" "Because I needed you to trust me," she said, finally meeting his gaze. "And because I feared you would refuse if you knew the truth." Her honesty disarmed him, leaving him momentarily speechless. For all her composure and authority, there was a vulnerability in her words that resonated deeply. It was the first time she had truly let her guard down, revealing a side of herself that mirrored his own doubts and fears. They stood in silence for a long moment, the city sprawling below them like a living canvas. Finally, Elias sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Silra. Every step forward feels like 2 steps back. Your people still don't trust me, and mine." He trailed off, the pain of betrayal evident in his voice. "They think I've abandoned them." "You haven't abandoned anyone," she said firmly. "You've chosen a path that serves both our peoples, even if they cannot see it yet. Trust takes time, Elias. Patience is the only weapon we have against doubt." Her words struck a chord, though they offered little comfort. Still, they reminded him of why he had agreed to this arrangement in the first place, to end the war, to save lives. That purpose burned brightly within him, a beacon guiding him through the darkness. As dawn broke over Velora, casting the citadel in golden light, Elias made a silent vow. He would endure whatever challenges lay ahead, no matter how daunting. The road to peace was fraught with obstacles, but he refused to falter. Not when so much depended on his perseverance. Little did he know, however, that the greatest trial was yet to come, and it would force him to confront not only his role as a leader but the very core of his identity. The trial came swiftly and without warning. A faction of rogue Jalari, emboldened by whispers of dissent, launched an attack on the citadel, seeking to overthrow Silra and shatter the fragile alliance. Chaos erupted as plasma fire lit up the halls, and Elias found himself fighting not just for survival but for the future he had sacrificed everything to build. Side by side with Silra, He defended the Nexus, the heart of their unity, from those who sought to destroy it. In that moment, their bond transcended duty. It became something real, forged in the heat of battle and mutual vulnerability. As the dust settled and the rebels were subdued, Elias stood bloodied but unbroken, his hand clasped tightly in Silra's. Her eyes shimmered with gratitude and something deeper, trust. "You've earned your place here," she whispered, her voice steady despite the weight of all they had endured. "And you've earned mine," he replied, finally allowing himself to believe in the possibility of a shared future. Together, they faced the rising sun, knowing the path ahead would still be fraught with challenges, but also hope. Their journey was far from over, yet for the first time, neither felt alone.